Hi, welcome to another episode of EDPS Talks, an exclusive series produced by the European Data Protection Supervisor to celebrate the institution's 20th anniversary. We sit down with leading voices from around the world to discuss their unique perspectives on data protection and privacy and how these shape their respective fields. I'm really excited to be here today with Amba Kak. For the last 15 years, Amba has been designing and advocating for technology policy in the public interest, ranging from network neutrality to privacy to algorithmic accountability across governments, industry, and civil society. She brings this experience to her current role, co-leading as co-executive director AI Now, a US-based research institute where she leads on advancing diagnosis and actionable policy recommendations to tackle concerns with artificial intelligence and concentrated power. Amba is also on the board of directors of the Signal Foundation. Amba will bring a wealth of knowledge and experience to today's discussion. We are thrilled to have you here with us. Thank you, Amba, so much for joining us, and welcome to the EDPS Talks.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
So we normally start with a question that we ask all our guests, which is actually a very fundamental one. What is privacy for you? What does privacy mean to you?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I'll say firstly that since I work in the policy space and so much of it is about, the big brother, the Orwellian dystopia and these like surveillance nightmares are often the stuff of my everyday job, I would say. But for me, I think privacy is much more about the world that I and we want to live in, and not about the world that we don't want to live in. So if you asked me what privacy is about, I would say at its core, it's about, autonomy, our ability to self-define our lives. And core to that is, being able to decide what others should or shouldn't know about us, being able to creatively play with what we conceal, what we reveal, and also maybe most importantly, exercise control over how other people contextualize or interpret information about us, especially those that have power over us. And so I think that the core of privacy is really our, this is, I'm borrowing from famous works around theorizing privacy, but this idea of self-authorship, your ability to define and write the story of your life rather than have it be defined or told by others. And I would say in the similar vein, it's much less, or privacy is often reduced or collapsed into this idea of choice or control. Privacy is just about, hiding or, the decision of whether to say yes or no to a particular kind of informational choice. But I think in the policy space, we often have to actually push back against that and say, no, this is not just about consent pop-up boxes. It's about power. And sometimes a power dynamic means that you can't actually exercise an effective choice or an effective control. And so what's much more important is having actors like the state regulatory bodies sort of step in to make sure that we are still able to exercise autonomy, that our privacy is protected, irrespective of what we might superficially choose. So yeah, I could talk about this for much longer, but I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. I mean, I found this very clear and inspiring. You said the ability that is also privacy for you to write, the autonomy to write our own life, in fact, our own story. And yet there are challenges to this autonomy, to this capability, as there are perhaps biggest challenges in tech at the moment. So I'd like to ask you, in your view, Amba, what are the biggest challenges that our society is facing at the moment right now when it comes to the impact that fast developing technologies is having on people's lives and ultimately democracy?
Yeah, I mean, I think, when people say we're in a moment of profound technological advancements and progress, I often respond to say, it really depends on who you're asking. Because if you asked members of the creative or the artistic community, they might speak of the last 18 months less as a parable of progress and much more as one of the anxieties of their own livelihood, but also the value of human creativity and that being under threat as a more existential question, right? Or if you ask, say, call center workers or nurses, or others who are sort of on the receiving end of AI getting integrated into their workflows, not always for the best, maybe in ways that devalue their own work or lead to negative implications on their wages, then they might also question this kind of broader thesis of just advancement and progress. So I think I would say the biggest challenge right now, or the thing that keeps me up at night in relation to tech, is not so much the tech itself, but really who gets a say in deciding how and whether this technology is implemented, in which sectors, what is the sort of democratic process that is being applied to these decisions. And I think the sad truth is that right now we're very far from anything resembling a democratic process. It is very much the will of very few companies, very few individuals within those companies that are deciding the trajectory of technology, what gets released to the public, how. They're also very, very powerful, but also very narrow commercial incentives that are powering just the technology itself. And so the decisions right now about whether or not to use AI in a particular context aren't being decided by whether it is in the interest of the public. They're being decided purely on the question of whether it will eventually lead to more profitability for a few companies. And they're obviously very, very skilled marketers. So I think where the opportunity, if I can reframe it, it's a challenge, but the opportunity right now is really to reassert democratic control over these technologies.
And I guess, Amba, that this might become particularly problematic when it comes. I mean, you mentioned AI. I was not mentioning this in my question, but this is, of course, very important for today's discussion. So AI has rapidly become also the engine for spread of disinformation. So I'm having in mind especially the impact on political campaigns in these times of elections. Do you think, and here I'm talking more specifically perhaps about data protection and privacy laws, do you think that data protection law can protect specifically individuals? You mentioned democratic processes also in determining the ultimate goal of AI, but what is your take there? If you can say just a few.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think misinformation and more broadly the challenges to democracy that are emanating from AI technologies and the AI industry are tremendous. They are multifaceted. There's often a tendency, however, to sort of reduce them to kind of technical challenges. So you'll see that a lot of the conversation around what to do about AI and misinformation becomes a conversation around how can we design the perfect watermark. So a watermark is essentially something that says this is AI generated content. And the thing is, we've been here before, maybe not with this generative AI moment. It's much worse, but over the last decade, we've had this conversation multiple times about, the concern around misinformation, fact, and how people's opinions are shaped. And I think what's very clear from the research and, anywhere in the world you look is that these are not purely technical questions. You can tell someone in 5 million ways that something is fiction and not fact, but if they want to believe that it is fiction or fact, they're going to believe it anyway. And that's going to be fueled by a broader challenge of polarization in the societies we live in. So I guess the first thing I want to say is that I typically sort of have an allergy to talking about misinformation and polarization as a technology problem. Technology is exacerbating these problems, sure, but I don't think it's at the root of it. And so that's one. The second is to say that I think the biggest sort of democracy challenge when it comes to AI and related technologies, like you said, there's nothing sort of unique in that way about AI alone, is really this is the concentration of power in the tech industry, specifically in Silicon Valley, that I just mentioned. So what I mean by that is that, look, you might say that there's nothing novel about this. These are very innovative companies. They've built to this kind of scale. They've accumulated data. They have accumulated capital. They've accumulated talent, and now they're making the most of it. But I think the question is that if we are going to buy into this narrative or the thesis that our social, digital, economic infrastructures of the future are all going to be based on these AI technologies, then I think it should really worry us that the resources that determine performance and determine quality and everything to do with AI are controlled disproportionately in very, very few hands. And within that, these companies have time and again over the last decade proven that they are not trusted or trustworthy custodians, right? So this sort of fetishization of sort of movement, like move fast, break things, over friction, over slowing down, over doing things right. And I'll get to your provocation on data protection in a second. I think that is something that Silicon Valley has sort of mythologized as being the way of doing things. Like we'll release these products into the market and we'll deal with the questions later. And so I think this is not, if these are the technologies of the future, then these individuals, these companies, this industry needs to be regulated very, very differently, or else we're going to see a kind of a concentration of power in unaccountable hands that I think is perhaps the biggest threat to democracy. And then to the point on data protection law, I think whether it's data privacy law or it's these broader algorithmic, accountability legislation that we're seeing all over the world, what these are doing is they're structurally changing the kind of, I guess, the way in which technology is built. So it's saying like, look, you don't get to release in commercially first, think about it later. There are certain sort of points of reflection that are essential at every stage in the technology design and development process. And we're not going to rely on you all and tech companies for just having those instincts. Maybe you have them, maybe you don't. But if there's a fork in the road between more money and the public interest, we know what companies will choose because that's what they're incentivized to do. So here's where the law steps in, and it says these are the questions that developers of technology need to be asking themselves. These are the hard limits that they need to be drawing for themselves to ensure that technology aligns with the public interest and not just with the bottom lines of these companies. And so at a very, very high level, I would say that's how I view data protection law as interceding, whether it's misinformation, whether it's other forms, inaccuracies, bias, discrimination. All of these come down to data and design choices that are made very much upstream in the process. And that's where these laws sort of restructure the dynamic within which technology is developed.
And I guess that this is also what is behind one of your main points that I heard you making publicly, so that data privacy regulation is AI regulation. And so my follow-up question for you is actually along this line. Do you think that privacy protection can specifically contain, I guess you partially already replied to this question, but AI risk, including societal ones, so more broadly?
Absolutely. I think both in the nuts and bolts of privacy law and bigger picture, privacy law has so much to offer to kind of hold the AI sector accountable. But just to step back, because you asked me about, that phrase, data privacy regulation is AI regulation. It actually, it came almost as a response to a policy debate right after ChatGPT was released, and excitement was, and nervousness and anxiety was at its peak, where lawmakers all over the world were sort of referring to AI as new. They were referring to the regulatory space as a blank slate. And we said, wait, hold on a second, because this type of a we're starting from scratch approach benefits industry players much more than it benefits anyone else, because it sort of, sets the clock right back and ignores the fact that what is AI? AI is data, it's compute, it's labor, and all of these inputs that go into making AI are the means by which AI can be regulated. So if data is, one of, if not the most important input that goes into shaping the outcomes when it comes to AI, it should be a no-brainer that, of course, one of the most powerful levers to kind of influence and impact and shape AI is, in fact, data regulation. And so that's sort of the incentive there, was to remind lawmakers that we already have many of the tools we need to regulate AI. And specifically, I'm happy to talk about them, but I would say just, very quickly, data minimization, rights to access data, rights against algorithmic discrimination, algorithmic auditing. These are pretty, standard data protection tools, and all of which are tremendously powerful if they are adequately enforced in the AI context.
And maybe insisting a few minutes more on this aspect of regulating AI, there's something I really wanted to ask you. Do you think it's possible, Amba, to find a global consensus, a global one, on how to regulate AI and on which ethical principles to agree upon?
Yeah, so I would say that the role for global governance is to set the floor and not the ceiling for what regulatory standards should be. And I say this because I am very worried by a particular kind of debate that tries to sidestep national and regional regulation and focus just on the highest level of global governance abstraction, because I think that is a tactic that is being used to move towards more voluntary, less enforceable regulation, as opposed to national law, which typically does have more teeth and actually can hit companies where it hurts. And this is not to say that, again, that global governance is irrelevant. It's just to say that it plays a very important function in norms building and in, like I said, setting a floor, but it absolutely should not distract focus from the need to both enforce and also pass really strong regulations in national context, because history has borne out that that's really where I think real accountability starts to percolate and actually hit companies where it hurts.
Absolutely. Thanks, Amba. And now this is something you hinted at earlier in your words, but I'd like to zoom in again on a specific aspect of technology development. You are crucially contributing to the reflection on how to make sure that tech and big tech reflects the public interest. And it sounds not as an obvious thing to achieve. So can we really have that? And if so, how?
I'll say the first thing we need to do is acknowledge that companies have no incentive to align with the public interest if, on the other side, they're leaving money on the table. So I think first is we need to be really clear-eyed about the commercial and purely commercial incentives that are currently powering this technology. And second, we need to also realize that a lot of the narratives around AI, whether it's the fact that large-scale AI equals advancement, that scale is a proxy for progress, that all countries in the world need to be investing in generative AI above all else. All of these narratives are also fueled by and motivated by the same set of narrow commercial incentives. So once we acknowledge that that is what is driving this space, then I think we can have a conversation to say, let's have a conversation about what AI could be if it was not driven by commercial incentives. And that doesn't, I think even as a thought experiment, it's a really interesting one, which is how would we, if this was a public project, a democratically controlled and owned project, what might this technological trajectory look like? And I think the answers will really go back to AI will not be a solution in search of its problem to make money. It will be about the biggest challenges facing our world, whether that's climate change, sustainability, healthcare challenges. energy challenges, and then from those points saying, how can AI, if at all, help us solve those problems? So for me, the answer to how to reshape technology in the public interest is to decenter the technology and say what's really important are these social challenges. How can technology be shaped to solve for these problems, rather than the other way around? And more practically, I would say, how do we shape big tech in the public interest to reflect the public interest? Our sort of playbook is to use law as one, not the only, but use law as one of the tools we have to shape the market, because at the end of the day, that is one of the very few ways in which we can shape or I would say, redirect some of the incentives that exist so that they do bend towards the interests of the public and not just these companies. And that involves enforcing existing laws in the books, creatively applying the tools we have so that they can be adaptable to the AI context, so that we don't always have to start from scratch. I mean, I think no one probably knows this and applies this better than the EDPS. Like, the idea is that we need to be creatively interpreting, clarifying, and constantly innovating on the law in order to keep up with technology. And finally, like I said, we need to regulate. We also need to build. And by that, I mean, we need public investment, philanthropic investment to think about, developing trajectories and applications of AI that aren't just pursuing market objectives. And I think in doing so, we will open up imagination that doesn't exist today, which is maybe it's not about chatbots for, X, Y, and Z, but maybe there are other ways in which data-driven technologies can actually serve the public interest, but maybe we're not seeing them because maybe they don't make money for companies. And so I think developing a public interest technology space is really crucial to the eventual vision.
And this links beautifully with my final question, actually, which really speaks to the future that you already described in a way. But I wanted to really know, Amba, what is your prediction now of how our societies and our democracies will look like in 20, 30 years from now? How we will achieve, how we will have technological development coexist with the respect of fundamental rights, if any, and the achievement of the public interest objectives you refer to?
Yeah, I mean, my answer to this would change if you ask me at different points of the day, just based on how optimistic or pessimistic I'm feeling or how realist I'm feeling. But I want to give you my most sort of hopeful answer, because I feel like that's what drives us, right? I think in 20 years, I think it would be the technological future that I'm most excited by would reframe who counts as expert in this conversation around technology itself. So I think we want to see those that are, if it's about healthcare AI, my dream is that we're actually asking nurses and healthcare workers, what is the kind of AI that would make your work better? And how can we empower you in your workplace rather than devalue you? And have these people be part of the conversation that's deciding not just how, but whether these technologies are integrated. I think similarly, having the creative industries have a say in how these technologies are deployed and being able to defend the broader project of human creativity. I think it's about my hopeful future is that there is a world for all of us to be sort of participants in shaping the trajectory of AI technologies, not just passive consumers. Because right now, I think there are, in the larger scheme of things, there is a very small percentage of people that are involved in building and deciding this technology, and the rest of the world is on the receiving end of using it, maybe enjoying it sometimes, maybe having, losing their job because of it, maybe having their job changed because of it. But we're all it's sort of a passive experience, right? I think how we could really flip the script, or what energizes me as a future to work for, is where everyone feels like they don't have to be a technology expert to participate in this discussion. This conversation about technology is a conversation that needs to be had by all of us, because really, what kind of AI we want is as much a question of what is the kind of world we want, and how can AI get us there.
Thank you, Amba. This brings us actually to the end of this episode, but I think you really passed through very important messages. for which we're grateful. With you, we've discussed aspects such as how to protect democracies and people in these challenging and uncertain times, how to achieve, and if so, how, in fact, public interest objectives accordingly, and ultimately how our world and digital reality may look like, hopefully, as you said, a democratically determined one. We all hope we will be able to get there. It was amazing to have you here, Amba. I'm really happy for this. Thank you so much.
Yeah, love these questions. Thank you for having me.
Thank you also to our listeners. We hope these insights give you a fresh perspective on privacy and data protection. If you enjoyed, as I hope, this episode, don't forget to catch up on previous interviews and follow the EDPS on our channels to discover more about our project marking the 20th anniversary of the European Data Protection Supervisor. I am Anna Colas, and this was EDPS Talk with Amba Kak, co-executive director of AI Now. Thank you very much, and see you in next talk.